Anin Buzo, Rory Ring Dishnakas. Good morning and thank you for joining us. I wear the medallion of the Ojibwe people. It was presented to me by my adopted brother Daryl Buesno, a past chief of Garden River Territory, and I'd like to welcome those from Bechuana and Garden River First Nation. I want to acknowledge and recognize that we are holding this event on the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Ojibwe people from Garden River and Bechuana First Nations. The Ojibwe people are one of three nations that belong to the historic Three Fires Confederacy, the traditional government of the Nashibek Nation. The other two nations are the Ottawa and Potawatomi. To the Shinnebec people, this is a sacred and spiritual place, has been known since time immemorial as Bawating. We wish to honor the original peoples on this part of Turtle Island as we recognize their homelands in the spirit of partnership and reconciliation. Miigwech. Good morning and welcome. I think I've met most of you, but I'm Rory Ring, the CEO for the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce. In behalf of your chamber, I'm pleased to welcome everyone this morning to our Fireside Chat with Chamber and MP Terry Sheehan. And we've turned the heat off on the fireplace, so we'll turn the air conditioning up and turn the fire off. That doesn't mean you're not going to be on the hot seat though, Terry. The Chamber of Commerce believes there's great value in holding these open discussions with our members and decision makers. Our firesides are a format where we cover issues of interest to our membership in an informal manner. There is no other organization in Sault Ste. Marie that provides such an intimate opportunity to get updates and have a conversation with your elected officials. Before we get to breakfast, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge some special guests with us this morning. And I'd like to acknowledge the following Chamber Board members: Kim Caruso. We have past President Monica Dale, whom I think is on her way, and past President Terry Sheehan. We have councillors Frank Fetta, Lou Turco, and I think Judy's perhaps on her way, CEO Al Horseman, and of course Mayor Provenzano. Thanks very much for coming. We have on TV, I don't know if you know our folks from Sioux Online, but a new community channel, really for the community. I think it's a terrific outlet, and we appreciate them coming and being able to put this out to the community. Also, I just want to remind everyone that we are holding our municipal election roundtables, and it will be that will formulate our municipal election platform, which we will most likely publish in the early part of September. And you do have on your tables the URL where you can go and sign up for those times. They're going to be small, very small focus groups, 5 to 6 people. And also I think there's a sign-up sheet at the back as well if you're wanting to come in to those. They'll be held at the Chamber office. We're just about getting ready for breakfast, so we're going to pause when breakfast comes in. It should be on its way shortly. But just keep things going. I don't know if you saw in the paper today, we got several articles issued in the insert that comes with the flyer distribution. We do that on a regular basis, but it has to do around trade. Those articles are actually taken from the U.S. Chamber, who has partnered with the chambers in Canada and across the United States to really present what the challenges are for tariffs in both our communities. Obviously, the Canadian Chamber and the U.S. Chamber have been working very closely together to put forward the notions of fair and open trade and rules-based trade. So just I encourage you to go and find these articles out in the paper, but just a couple of numbers that maybe bring home to our U.S. brothers and sisters that the tariffs on steel and aluminum, the results, once you add them all up, are roughly about 1.8 million potential in job losses for the U.S. And here in Canada, it's probably 120 to about 160. So again, like everything, just multiply it by 10 when you go to the States. So it is very significant. And I think too, when you look at the numbers now that they're considering both automotive and the counter moves with China, those numbers are being estimated now at roughly 2.6 million jobs. So again, if you think about the impact of that, not only how that translates to Ontario, but to Canada as a whole, especially when you start to talk auto. So we can't really stress enough how important it is to reach out to anybody you know and encourage anybody in the States, if you're doing business over there, to really tell the story about fair and open trade, rules-based trade, and the relationship between Canada and the United States. I know Mayor Provenzano has been very active in communicating with his counterparts to tell the story, and we encourage everybody to continue to do that. So, Mayor, thank you for your efforts. And we know it goes far beyond just steel, and it is a national issue as well. So we encourage everyone to keep in tune, and we'll talk a little bit more, Terry, about what's going on that front. So I had a little bit of a subtitle for this session today: Trump, toupees, and tariffs. So we didn't see the retaliatory one that banned orange hair plugs from the U.S. So, but we'll leave that to, and I think we got breakfast coming in. Thanks very much, and we'll get back to you shortly. Good to go. We're on TV. Thanks very much, folks, and the staff of the Quattro. Thank you very much for breakfast. We appreciate the crispy bacon, my favorite.
Very much.
Terry, welcome. Thank you once again for joining us for our Fireside Chat. We really appreciate you taking the time to have these chats with us, and in a very informal setting. And we know that you'll cut right to the chase and sort of give us an update from the Hill and what's going on. So really, we're going to take questions from the floor, so feel free to just make it known that you would like to ask a question. The lights are very bright for on TV, so I may not be able to see you. Perhaps Bob and Boucher can keep an eye out for any questions. So, Boucher, thank you for joining us for the summer under the Canada Summer Job Grant. Thank you, Terry.
Perfect.
She's a great addition. Goma Yu, graduated in political science. Off to London to do her master's in international policy at the former school of Justin's dad.
Wow.
How about that?
That's amazing.
Yeah, we'll look for his legacy in the halls.
Yep.
Again, so really, let's just start at top of mind. Obviously, lots going on in the world, and you just got out of the Steel Caucus or International Committee on Trade, so maybe you can give us an update for that, and I'm going to pass you the mic.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And I also want to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Ojibways and how important it is, and I do love your medallion. And this is my third chamber breakfast, and I remember the first one, and that was when Daryl was here, and also the chief from Garden River, Paul, and he stood up and he made that pronouncement, and I really think that was a very special moment for both of us, that he said, I feel really honored to be inside here, because we're used to being outside the door. So I think that speaks a lot to what is happening here in Sault Ste. Marie when it comes to truth and reconciliation, when it comes to moving forward, working together for a better community. So I just want to acknowledge that too as well.
And just to let you know that Paul and Dean had planned to be here, but they are, I said the elections.
Yes, I know that
happen,
yeah.
So they do send their best.
I saw them on TV last night. We have a new chief in Ontario. So it's been very busy, obviously, extremely busy as it relates to standing up for steel and aluminum. And I do appreciate, to begin with, the support that the Chamber has given me and working with me, to the business community, to the unions, to the mayor, to council, to our MPPs, because my riding is a little bigger than the city. It goes all the way into Algoma, so I both have Ross Romano and Mike Mantha that we work with, and it's the community in general that has pulled together, and it's been very, very busy with tariffs. This week, I'll start with this week and maybe go back a bit, but this week I was invited to participate in a special urgent meeting that was called. So the House rose last week, but we were called back for a few of us for an international trade meeting. That's not my usual committee. My usual committee is the industry committee, industry, science, technology, covering economic development. And but I sit on the international trade committee, as you know, because you've participated on it, when it relates to tariffs, and when it relates to steel and aluminum. And we had gathered a bunch of witnesses to listen to what the pending impact of what the Canadian counter tariffs would be on the Americans, also what the American tariffs mean on the businesses, the workers, etc. And it's not good. It's not good. To be quite frank, no one wins in a trade war. People hurt. But the number one thing that people have told me was that they expected us to retaliate, and retaliate strong. And that's one thing that I'm proud that we did, is stand up, and in a very hard way. Like I said, they kind of sucker punched us and we gave them an uppercut. We not only looked at dollar for dollar on steel and aluminum, but we also looked at another bunch of items. There was about 128, I believe. It was the strongest retaliatory measures since the Second World War. And people, when it happened, I'm going to go back a little bit before the trade meeting, where Trump announced them. And the Prime Minister, as soon as he announced it, shortly thereafter announced our countermeasures. And that's when I was on the phone. I was on the phone speaking with the mayor, with you, with the three local presidents, the United Steelworkers, to the CEOs of both Terrace and Algoma, just to tell them what it meant before and after. And everyone, again, was on the same wavelength that, yes, we needed strong retaliatory measures to show that we're not going to tolerate this and we're standing up for steel. And when the list came out, there was a whole bunch of other items. People were questioning, why pickles? Well, the items were selected, steel and aluminum, dollar for dollar, which made sense, because we have, actually, they export $2 billion more than we do, when you count stainless steel and some other stuff. But regular steel, it's about trade balance. And aluminum, we also have a very integrated system there. So people said, well, why did you choose all these other items? And, well, when you take a look at the pickles, for instance, well, that was from an area where there's a pickle factory from a congressperson from Wisconsin, I'm not going to say their name, but you know who it is, who was also very critical of our dairy industry. And if you take a look at the list, there's a lot of links, not only to steel and aluminum, but people that have been just against the free trade, against forestry, against solar panels, against whatever. So now it was, so you like tariffs? How do you like tariffs now? And that has caused a lot of reaction from the American people. I'm getting called, we're getting called, the Prime Minister's office is getting called, Chrystia Freeland's office is getting called by American businesses, by American people, and our answer is, call your congressperson, call your senator. We're seeing a lot of that pressure, and we saw a lot of that pressure come forward on Tuesday, because we are, and this is perfect timing for this meeting, July 1st, our counter trade measures go in place. And we did hear some feedback from some of those groups that are going to be affected. So it's created a lot of attention, a lot of noise. As you mentioned, the United States is very big, so we got to make sure that we keep to their attention. One of the important things that came to be with the tariffs was the Prime Minister's interventions. You were here, the mayor was here, and a number of people were here as well to meet, to chat with the Prime Minister when it came for Standing Up for Steel tour. And a lot of those ideas were incorporated very quickly into making an already strong trade system even better. We had in the last two budgets placed a number of items in place that fought dump steel. Well, after that meeting, we had the Prime Minister evoking even more resources, hiring more border people to do the inspections, to creating even more countermeasures. And he's taken just a total vested interest in steel and standing up for steel and aluminum, and vis-a-vis all workers, even in the other industries. So after the tariffs were announced, and then Friday I stood up in the House of Commons when they came in place, and I called for the whole House to stand together, because there's a natural propensity, and I'm not talking against the opposition. It's sort of what they do is they criticize and they criticize. So I stood up first day when it was thinking, and I just called for everyone to stand together. there was a little bit of that negativity, beginning. But by Monday, a lot of that negativity was gone because the people had said, no, we need to stand together. Within that week or so, everyone was standing united against, these punitive, unfair, unjust tariffs. And we started to see it come together. But in Sault Ste. Marie, we're way ahead of the game. We were doing that way before the House of Commons did. We were kind of the leader in Canada that way. So on Monday, the Prime Minister called in all the CEOs, including Algoma and Tenaris, to chat about the tariffs. I was invited to the meeting. We met. It was a very long meeting. He met with his cabinet beforehand. And he told his cabinet to give them and help them in any way they can. And so he met and looked them straight in the eye, talked about the issues. And one of the comments he made, he just looked at everyone and he said, I got your back. And so they totally were 100% behind that. And he then talked a lot about it. He really understands the industry. In fact, one of the CEOs said, wow, you could run a steel plant. So we know the issues and the seriousness of the tariffs and how they are going to intentionally are aimed at hurting workers. So one of the things that we continue to talk about with the steel and aluminum industry is how we can support the workers. And there's a lot of ideas. Those ideas were brought forward, a lot of them on Tuesday. And in my background, I used to be with the Ministry of Training, College Universities, and we did a lot of training and retraining for people who were on EI. There's a suite of ideas out there. But my advice to the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office is that each and every business looks a little different from the other one. They each have a different business model. Some have operations in the States, some don't. Some export more to the United States than others. They're going to hurt more. So, and each workforce is a little different. And I took a quote from you on Tuesday, and I said, one difference between Sault Ste. Marie and other areas, and Sault Ste. Marie and other small town steel and aluminum places, is that you can't drive 20 minutes and get another manufacturing job. That's how significant it is. So what we need is supports in the short term for anybody that is affected. Opportunities to train, retrain. If somebody is laid off short term, perhaps an opportunity to go and, if they're a laborer, go train and maybe get a welding ticket. Become more valuable as you go forward. There's other ideas as well, and I'm not going to delve into all of them, but we're looking at all options, and all of the cabinet is supportive of that.
There's also been a lot of discussion. I know you've probably been involved in some of those discussions around the notion of diversion.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, we've taken measures to counter the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. And if you can comment maybe about some of the discussions or activities or actions that may come forward in terms of protecting the Canadian market from that steel or product that was destined for the U.S. entering into Canada, because we haven't really put out a defensive tariff mechanism, if you like. But I think I know that there is some talks going on about how we do that, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about that, Terry.
Sure. Well, certainly. I guess again, we have to go back in time before there really wasn't any kind of trade protection. But the industry, the unions came to us right away. So in 2016, we put in place two things. One was a piece of legislation that kept on the penalty that someone who was caught dumping longer, up to about another year. Because when someone's caught dumping, the penalty stays on for about 5 years, so it extended to almost another year, which gave people more time to reapply if necessary. And then we went on and consulted, that was part of it, and the chamber, the businesses, the people, the unions all contributed. Then we made 4 of what they called the most significant changes, and anti-circumvention, scoping, market distortion, and union participation. And what that did was it, first of all, met the China, I'll use China as an example. China is the #1 dumper. It met China full on in stopping dumping. It also stopped China from circumventing the whole process by sending the steel to another country where they just stamped it or did whatever, maybe slit it and then sent it over. Again, dumping it, because China's overcapacity is twice what the world needs. And also what we ended up doing was also have a union participation. And I was pleased to see Tenaris, Cody Alexander was in against some dumped steel pipe from Korea this past year. And the union made a compelling argument showing how it really hurts the worker and the people. And the judge actually was like listening to them, lots of questions, and they won that one. So there's a whole host of things that were put in place. But one of the things that they needed quickly was to resource a lot of that. And after the meeting in the Sioux, everyone was calling on some more money and some more experts. These people that work at the border are experts. They're able to do some sort of forensic auditing of various companies and determine if there's dumping. So we've hired 40 more of them, which will allow the cases to come through. So one of the things that we continue to look at as ways to improve, and the finance minister yesterday said, yes, we're monitoring the dumping, we're looking at the dumping, because the fear is right now that because the United States has done what it has done, and these tariffs aren't just against Canada, they're against the world, against all the countries, Asia, Europe, Mexico. Canada is that, okay, if they can't get to the United States, they might look to Canada to come in. So we're entertaining and looking at more ideas. We know that what we put in place was important. On Tuesday I asked the question, and I mentioned about those things we put in place, and I asked the Canadian Steel Producers Association, Joe Brown-Beatty, said, what does the steel and aluminum industry look like without those? He said, we'd have been devastated. Might not have been one. So yes, so that's where we're at, and we're continuing to look at continuing to strengthen it, our trade measures. We're looking at ways, how can we support the industry that is hurt and still be WTO compliant, and also how we can support the workers.
Well, as you might know, on Saturday, and we have Peter here from the bridge, we had our 32nd annual International Bridge Walk, about 1,100 people. Yep. I don't know if you've ever witnessed 500 Canadians scuffing their shoes before they got to customs, but it's quite a sight. But really, it actually showed the level of camaraderie that's between our two communities, the Twin Sioux, and I think that connectivity that Canadians have to our American brothers and sisters. And it's been 150 years as a country trading with the U.S., immemorial for our First Nations communities. And it's tough, I think, for us as Canadians to look at this and think how quickly that has been forgotten. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about the human sense on the Hill about that very notion?
Well, it's one of those perplexing notions that both Canadian and American politicians don't get. Almost a year ago, we started going down to the United States. We knew that 232 had been commissioned by the president with Wilbur Ross. So we went down intentionally, and we were meeting with American politicians. And we tell the story about Sault Ste. Marie being on the border. My boy went to Sioux College, then went to Lake State, now he's at Algoma. So I mean, the free flow of students, of products and services, like it's so seamless. And we have such a great friendly relationship. Mayor and city councils on both sides of the borders, we have dinner together and we talk about how we can do things together, and we have in the past. For a few people, they might remember the ABC bowling bid from years and years ago. A great effort. We did some joint friendly stuff in the winter together, and anybody who ever played hockey or football has played with or against an American, right? It's fantastic. So, our arenas are open to them, their arenas are open to us. So when the president came down with this 232 and said they view Canada as a national security threat, It was inconceivable, unacceptable, because we have the longest history of peace, the longest undefended border. So when we were down there, we'd tell that story. Plus, I'd also talk about the integration of the market. And Algoma Steel was perfect. And that was one of the reasons why I was down there, because we're talking about free trade. We're also talking about how integrated the markets are. So as we know, Algoma Steel produces steel with steel workers, Canadian steel workers. But they use coal and iron from miners in 4 states over the border. It's then put onto trucks and boats and trains, and it's shipped to Algoma. It's then made into steel and put back into the supply chain in auto, defense. And some of the steel that protected a lot of American soldiers during Afghanistan. In fact, Algoma has a piece of steel there from the U.S. Department saying thanks. It saved a lot of American lives in the manufacturing. So I sat there, and I sat in an American congressperson's office from Ohio, and we had conservatives and NDP and all of us, and I was telling that story, and I said, let's just keep that going, and let's go after China. And he said, amen, brother. And I don't know if he's religious or not, but that was his thing. And he has steel interest in his district. So I was pleased to see when the American administration came out with this, that he was writing letters and doing interviews about how wrong this was. So I appreciate, and I bring this up too, because during Tuesday's urgent tariff meeting, I introduced the letters that you had sent me last week from yourself, from Windsor Chamber, from the Hamilton Chamber, who we have worked with since being elected in strengthening Canada's steel industry, but also from Perrin Beatty, who is the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And this letter was signed by the presidents of all the Ontario Chambers of Commerce. And it said, we stand up for and support what the government is doing with retaliatory tariffs, and has asked us, politicians, basically to redouble our efforts to go to Washington, to get down there and tell our story. And has said that he's going to be encouraging the chamber networks, that we already know what we're doing here, to go and do the same, to get into the Americans, to talk to them. You mentioned that in your intro. Anybody here, anybody in TV shot, just pick up a phone, send an email, a letter, go for a visit, go for a coffee, invite them here, whatever, and just remind them about that relationship, because it's that kind of pressure that's going to mount. And particular, the business pressures are being conceived. Tuesday, when I spoke, the first round of layoffs had happened as a relate in the United States dealing with tariffs. It was a nail company that was importing steel from Mexico, but they're talking about closing their entire doors by Labor Day, and that's 600 jobs. So we're starting to see the negative effect in the United States and those jobs you're talking about, and they're starting to cascade in there. So I've been down again, and I took the all Canadian all-party Steel Caucus down to meet the American Steel Caucus too as well, and had a number of meetings. So we've been there twice. We're going to go down again, and yeah, I think that it's really important for us to just to amplify the noise and tell the importance of the relationship, but also the perils of these tariffs.
So changing stride a little bit, and maybe something that's interesting, and of course transpired from the recent provincial election. We have Premier-elect Doug Ford, who will soon be heading up the province, has announced that cap and trade in Ontario is cancelled, and that he will challenge the federal jurisdictions in terms of being able to apply a cap and trade to the province of Ontario. I think from our discussions the Chamber of Commerce is not a fan. Our members are not a big fan of a cap and trade system unless it's well designed, and that there's been a measure or an economic impact analysis done on how that will affect the economy. And of course that sensitivity is now, I think, amplified because of the trade things that are going on. So can you comment about sort of what the view will be in terms of the cap and trade, Ontario, and the challenges that are coming forward?
Well, I guess what to begin the comment would be that well, we ran on the notion that the economy and the environment go hand in hand. That you can do both. That you can work to a cleaner, better world and still support the economy and jobs. So during the Paris Accord, a number of the provinces, territories also signed on and said, yeah, let's do our part to get greenhouse emissions down. And to do that, we need to put a price on pollution. And this isn't the first time that society has done this. When I think about my father's time, things looked a lot different. They were a lot dirtier. St. Mary's River was a lot more polluted. You just take a look at places like Sudbury, when they didn't have a whole lot of mechanisms in place. It was very, 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 very dirty. And so we put it to the province, the territory says, okay, you come up with your ideas, okay? The government in Ontario at the time came up with that system. But there are other jurisdictions that came up with other systems. So what we have said is that, okay, we want you to put in place your own system. Be the master of your own house. And pretty well 87% of Canada was covered by some kind of system. So Premier-elect, because I don't think he becomes Premier till tomorrow, said he's going to kill that previous government system. Well, the question is, and I don't know what the answer is, will he put in something else in place? If not, the federal government is willing to do it. I take a look at a jurisdiction like Alberta, where they have a price on pollution. What they do is they take that money, and the price on pollution is to basically correct and have businesses put in place things that fight pollution. Locally, I know that I spoke with Algoma earlier, and they said, just let us know what the rules are, and we'll do it. Make it consistent, make it understandable, and we'll do it. So, to answer it is, I'll just take a look at Alberta. Their system, I'm not saying that's the system that Doug Ford will take or that the federal government will take, but is they put a price on pollution, but then they give it right back to the people, right? So that's put back into the pocket of the middle class, then to spend in local economies, etc. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you can take something back, back to the Hill. We really believe and stand for the notion of recycling those dollars back to community. We've estimated that under the provincial system, there's roughly $25 to $30 million exiting our community of Sault Ste. Marie, whether it's through fuel or natural gas, cost of power, as well as the other elements that are there. That's a lot of money that's coming out of our economy. And how do we get that back in other than something like the Green On plan? Which, yes, it is targeted towards the middle class. But if we're talking about aggressive reduction in GHG production, we need the research and the development to be able to do that. And we believe we need to do it on a regional basis, right? So obviously you've got Tenaris, you've got Algoma, who really produce a base level of GHG. If you're in the concrete business, if you're producing concrete or high energy uses, you have a base level footprint that you must balance your system on. And to break that needs radical innovation, radical technological advancement. And really the only way you can achieve that is by working with folks like Tenaris and Algoma. And we see that view being as we should be reinvesting that $25 to $30 million that's exiting our community into places like Algoma University or Sault College or independent research places to partner and build the capacity to address that greenhouse gas production locally, regionally, and that's reinvesting back into our community and creating that innovation, that local ecosystem as well. Maybe you can just talk about if you can take that message back for us.
I certainly will, and part of what the federal government does, because we're kind of delving into provincial kind of jurisdiction and territorial things, and I use just one example, which basically says what you're saying is, okay, take the money from the polluters, which is meant to serve as a corrective behavior, to say, well, just lessen your emissions and you will not pay a price. but that money to be put back into the community and back into people's pockets. That's one example. So without going too much into what Doug Ford may or may not do, I will say on your suggestion, there are opportunities to do that now with the federal government. The federal government has a strategic investment fund, and it is for larger projects. The minimum investment is $10 million. So Algoma Steel, Tenaris, etc. could access these funds. It's 50-cent dollars, and it is for investments that could do exactly what you want to do. And so there is a mechanism in place right now, and I am hopeful that as we come out of this tariff kind of situation, that our industry will access. It's just new. It's in the 2018 budget, so it's a great segue for what we're talking about today. But there's opportunities to create some advanced manufacturing in a more efficient, because a lot of times more efficiency creates less greenhouse gas emissions. So there is a mechanism there now.
Okay, good. So tax reform.
Yes.
We've got obviously a year and a half away from a federal election. We got through a period where Finance Minister Murnau really socked it to the business community through some tax reform. The business community mobilized. The minister did listen and ratcheted back some of those things. Are we going to anticipate some other tax reform, or is there discussion happening where the federal government would be willing to review the whole tax system instead of just looking at these sort of niche kind of amendments?
And yes, first of all, I'd like to thank you and your chamber members for their input. We announced a year and a half ago some tax proposals to reform, and it was in our platform. We said we were going to look at them, and we said we're doing this along with our plan to reduce small business tax, which I'm pleased, because in 2015, small business tax was 11%. January, it's now January 2018, it moved to 10%, and then this upcoming January will be moving down to 9%. We already had the lowest small business tax rate in the G7, but now it's really, really low. What does that mean? Average about $7,500 for a small business. But my background was helping small businesses start at the EDC, and $7,500 is a lot of money when you're starting out. And if you think about over 2 years, that's 15. And then you're getting into 23. And we know the first 3 years is one of the most challenging times for a small business. So if you have that kind of relief, it's really important. We also undertook to analyze the private corporations tax rate. And we put out a bunch of measures, and it certainly garnered a lot of attention. And a lot of people didn't believe it was a consultation to start with. I mean, I had people in my office say, this is done. You guys are done. There's no way you're changing this. And, that's me pulling a little bit of the punches on the words that were said. I said, no, this is really a consultation. We're here, we're listening. So lots of emails, lots of phone calls, lots of personal meetings. You and I have met on it many times. When the consultation was done, a lot of changes were put in place. We did listen, and I did talk to Bill Murnau many of the times. When you talk about income sprinkling, which was one of the contentious issues, and what income sprinkling is that somebody who is earning, usually a professional is earning a certain amount of money, can take that income and then move it to a spouse or adult children to lessen how much tax they're paying. And I said, we've heard, and I want to make this perfectly clear, because I know for a fact, like for instance, there are some doctors where their wives actually are working in the business. You might not see them at the counter when you check in, but they're overseeing the books. They're managing the records. They are doing a lot. So what the problem was is there was no measures in place, right? So we put in place measures. So income sprinkling is allowed. It's much more efficient. It's just you have to make sure that a family member is engaged in the business in a meaningful way, and there is now a test. So that lessened a lot of it. On the passive income, first of all, a lot of people were concerned that it was going to be retroactive. that passive income is that people were able to put some money away, but it was really an indefinite amount. It was just, there was no limit. It was unlimited. So what we did is took the unlimited tax advantage and said, okay, well, in all fairness, everything that you've saved, because you saved it under a system, then people started doing this about 10 years ago, I found, for some kind of advice, and who knows how it started, but it started. But they had amassed this money, so there's no retroactivity to it. And that's fair, because if you were under the impression and advice that this is the way to go, and for us to go back and then tax that wouldn't make sense. So, and a lot of people were relieved on that, I tell you, that we didn't make it retroactive. We didn't even make it retroactive to the consultation period. We made it go on a go-forward basis. And we said, going forward, you can put away $1 million of passive income, plus $50,000 a year, then our tax. And that way you can save for retirement, you can save for maternity or paternity leave, sickness, vacation, and whatnot. And I'm not going to go to all the details, but you hit on the head that we did. Another thing was the capital gains. Now, capital gains was really important when someone wants to pass on a business to a family member. And in particular, when you take a look at the fishing industries, the farmers, that was really important. So we didn't touch it. We heard that loud and clear that was something you shouldn't. So yeah, we went through a very tumultuous time, but we were listening, and it was a consultation, so we changed that. And the good news is we're moving the tax rate from 11% for small business down to 9%. And since we're on taxes, and I'm going to announce today, this is separate from everything we've talked about, I'm pleased to announce today that on July 20th, 2 years ahead of schedule, we'll be indexing the Canada Child Benefit. And what does that mean? Well, if I use an example, if there was a single parent making $35,000 a year, had 2 kids, that would mean an increase 2 years ahead of time of $560 tax-free to spend on music lessons, tutoring, healthy food, back-to-school stuff, save for university or college. So that'll bring up that person's support to over $11,000 in tax-free benefit per year. That's extremely important, keeping money local, as we say, because, and it's just not for single parents, I can give you analysis on 2 parents as well. So it's a more generous than the previous government's various boutique tax write-offs, and it's tax-free. Overall, I looked at the stat because I was coming here. What does it mean for an economic impact, and how much dollars does it put into the pockets of Suites in the area? Almost $52 million a year. $52 million a year we're investing tax-free into Sault Ste. Marie families. And families all look different. There's no rhyme or reason. The threshold is the check stop coming to you. When you're making a lot of money. And I talked to a business person that owned a very large business here and has a lot of supporters. And he says, "I love the Canada Child Benefit. It is one of the biggest social re-engineering around." He says, "Do you know how important this is for the people that work for me?" He says, "It's amazing." He says, "I could never afford to give them this kind of support, but they do." And he says, "They'll shop at my own place. They'll shop all around. They'll spend it. $52 million a year, tax-free, and that's for parents. And that's how you support and keep families here. That's how you support and keep young people here, because our young people are the one raising the kids. We want them to have kids. We want them to have those supports. So it is a real change in the way we do things. So I'm proud to announce that here today.
Excellent.
And I appreciate it.
Thanks, Terry. That's true. Now, before we just move on, and I'm going to ask if there's any questions from the floor as well. But if you could just comment on where the federal government stands on matching the reductions at the corporate level that Trump administration has applied to their business community.
Our combined tax rate that you're speaking of is the second lowest in the G7. Okay, we're well aware of what Trump has done. And he asked if we're open to new ideas. Yes, of course, we're looking at them. But what Trump has failed to do, and heed the advice of businesses, is he's just taxed the Americans like you wouldn't believe. What he has done with the corporate rate pales in comparison to what Americans are going to face when buying a new auto and buying a new refrigerator. That's a 25% tax on American people, and the Americans are pretty upset about that. And aluminum, it's a tax on their beer. So he is, yeah, definitely, and there's some people who are pretty upset about that. So he put forward that proposal, but this tariff proposal is negating anything that he thinks he's going to gain with that. But are we open to looking at things? Of course we are.
Good. Well, you know, the title of that article that I referred to in the paper is Trade War, What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind paying 25 to 40% more for everything.
Yes.
And that's basically the bottom line. Do we have any questions from the floor? Please? I know it's early. No? We're good?
Yeah, we covered it all, I guess.
So let's talk pipelines.
Yes.
Huge investment. Can you sort of maybe lay out perhaps what the game plan looks like for that investment?
Pipelines, yes. It's been a controversial subject. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, a lot of us understand the importance of pipeline. Ask anybody who works at Tariffs Tubes or is associated with that business. And again, under this environment, it really underlines and highlights that we can't always be dependent on our north-south trade. So it really underlined and highlighted the fact that we need to be able to get our energy to market and not just going through the States. So we did move forward with the TMX. And during Tuesday, I asked a question, but I ran out of time, and one of the steel producers there, I had asked, do you support it? I know it was rhetorical. They do. The steel industry supports the TMX. Without the TMX, there was a study done that we were losing $15 billion a year in revenue. For every year it doesn't go forward, $15 billion. Well, that's important. So as you know, we are investing $4.5 billion. Plan is to get it done, and then the plan is to sell it, to get rid of it. The other issue had been, when I go back to my first comment, is we believe that the environment and the economy go hand in hand. So we first approved both of these projects quite a while ago. And we did it after consultation with First Nations, with a whole bunch of environmental approvals and checklists, and with the business community. In fact, it was Pablo Rodrigo, I'm trying to see if I had to say his name, the global CEO for Tenaris, Pablo. He met with the Prime Minister and had requested through my office to meet with him because he wanted to know, are we going to put in place these strengthening the response to dumping? This is going back 2 years ago. Tenaris at the time was 60 people, and he wanted to know about pipelines. And he wanted to know about infrastructure and spending too as well. So it was the only meeting the Prime Minister took outside of his official meeting with the President in Argentina. And the Prime Minister and I had a meeting afterwards, and he said, I told him that, yes, yes, and yes. And it was like 2 days later, we approved them. This is like going back a couple of years ago. And so what had happened was all that work has been done. The approvals have been put in place. And, we're undertaking to get our energy to market. And we're doing it in an environmentally responsible way, but also, which is really going to be a boom for the Canadian economy and Sault Ste. Marie's.
Good. Well, if we're going to talk pipe, we got to talk pot.
Sure.
October 17th.
Yep.
Oddly enough, I think it's the same date as the municipal election, isn't it? Don't vote under the influence. I believe it is. 22nd?
22nd? Okay.
There you go. It's close. So obviously it's now law.
Yep.
And maybe, you can refer a little bit to the process perhaps between the Senate and the legislature and getting that moved forward. But can you talk a little bit about the revenue share and really what the expectations perhaps are in terms of revenue share and how it will impact Sault Ste. Marie?
Certainly. Well, as part of our election platform, we had stated clearly that we were going to create a very restrictive regime for marijuana by legalizing it, to get the marijuana out of the hands of children. There was a study done that Canada had the most amount of children smoking marijuana than anywhere else. And it was very alarming, because all studies showed that where these children were buying their marijuana, under the proverbial stairwell, or back in the bush or in an alleyway, was the same person that had meth with them, that had crack with them, and wouldn't hesitate to offer that to them, or potentially a very underhanded lease with some kind of addictive drug as well, and that was scary. So we wanted to create a very restrictive regime, and to have the government, like the LCBO here in Ontario, have a person there that is going to ID the person, is going to look at them, and make sure it was okay to sell them. We've also increased the penalties against people that sell marijuana to children. And the problem was too, as well, is the people who were selling it were the outlaws. They're the ones in the business, a $6 billion business. And they were taking that money and using it to buy guns, machine guns, handguns, and other things, to become even, greater at their criminal activities. So we're taking that, out of that particular market. So in Ontario, they've organized themselves, through an LCBO kind of network. It'll be very restrictive. The revenue share, the majority goes to the province. The feds will get some, but we wanted, the province has a lot of responsibility. They will then be talking with the municipalities about, revenues and sharing, because the municipality has a lot to do with it. And I appreciated the discussion that the city councillors that were here the other day had at council. And I'm very confident the mayor and city council have a firm grip on this. They understand it, and will do a great job for this community. So I appreciate that.
And during that process, there has been some discussion that the discussion with our Indigenous communities and our First Nations around the legalization has been somewhat limited. There's been some commentary in the news. I have to admit, I haven't really followed it in that great detail, but could you make some comments about that? And then we're just going to move into a general discussion on reconciliation and what we see going forward.
Well, I think that, I've had conversations with many Indigenous groups, and we always have to be respectful of our Indigenous folks. I think that majority of the conversation has been good. We're always looking at making sure we respect and keep our nation-to-nation relationships going. I have not heard anything extremely negative around here or been involved in those. I know that there are certain areas where First Nations are involved in other industries that look at how can they participate in it, and I think that discussion is going to keep going on and on and on as it does with those other items that they sell on reserve. But it's a very important process, and one of the reasons why we moved to October 17th was everyone was anticipating that we'd be through this summer, because we passed the legislation with amendments, including Senate amendments, and there was more power granted to some Indigenous amendments that allow them to participate, and that was part of the give and go between Parliament and the Senate introduced those, and we did take some of their amendments. Some of them we just pointed out they were covered, and it was passed. So my point being, it got all passed, including some of the Indigenous amendments, but the provinces had said we want some time, we want more time, the police forces wanted some more time. So that's hence the date of October 17th, as it allows for quite a few more months.
So on reconciliation, just to let you know that this fall, September, the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce has written a resolution to present to the Canadian Chamber around public, private, and Indigenous partnerships. You know, and trying to create an environment under the 94 calls to action. 92 deals specifically to corporate Canada. And we're looking at how we can build the call to action 92 within our own community and creating a partnership between, you know, obviously workforce is a big issue for us here. Immigration will not solve all the issues, it's part of the solution. But our fastest growing demographic is within our Indigenous community, and we need to engage that workforce here and trying to create partnerships to be able to do that so that they are participating in economic prosperity and bringing up their average income, because we know it is about 2/3 of a non-Indigenous person. So I'd be interested just in your comments around creating some of those opportunities, you know, to bridge that gap in terms of workforce and skills development.
Well, it's very important, and we have a great opportunity here because of Algoma University, Sault College, you know, being here. And as you know, we've made investments at Algoma University and into the university itself, $2.5 million to the Shinlock Hall, because they wanted to keep that hall as is, but they needed to upgrade, you know, the air conditioning, the internet, and a whole bunch of things. But it's imperative to keep that as a reminder of the history and the need for truth and reconciliation. We've invested in, the federal government has invested in some of the displays and museums at Algoma, which are very, very, very moving, a great reminder. I've met with the students, I've sat in there and listened to the stories, and it is critical that it happens. And I've said it many times, it's one of my favorite stories, when then Chief Justice Sinclair was at Algoma University. I was at one of the Truth and Reconciliation meetings. And he was explaining and going through the process. It was a great slideshow, very moving, very emotional. And there was 94. And so one of the students, he was taking questions, one of the students put up their hand and said, "Where do we start?" And he paused for a while and he thought, said, "Education. We must start with education." So I'm glad Algoma is taking a role, not only in the Sioux, but across this great country. As you know, we invested $10.2 million into the Initiative Act Discovery Center, which will have a Chief's library, which will serve as Chief Shinlock's vision for, you know, a teaching lodge, a teaching wigwam. And right on the St. Mary's River, there's so much potential. So, you know, I meet regularly with them, and we have a lot of opportunities to continue that growth. You can see it as you drive by, you know, Queen Street. It's growing onto itself. But that is huge, because it's important not only to educate Indigenous people, but ourselves as well. And there are a lot of people that want to learn. In meeting with them, they see a lot of opportunity, not only, again, for Sault Ste. Marie or Canada, but the world. A lot of people would like to come here and study, to learn those things. Sault College, another excellent Indigenous program. They have a lot of the trades programming, and, you know, we invested $5 million into their growth through the Strategic Infrastructure Fund, and we have some more opportunities to work in there. But there's a lot of potential, and Patty Hayjut, who is I'm chair of the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus, she's part of that. She's Thunder Bay. There are a number of items in the 2018 budget that support apprenticeship and support education and training. You know that we had Ozma was there, you were there, Dr. Common was there, a whole bunch of people met with the Prime Minister recently at the round table, including the folks at in the steel industry. And that was one of the things we talked about, the importance of you know, training and our next workforce, because steel, is not only just about the trades, but it's also about business. It's about IT. I mean, we went through the Algoma. It was like going through the Starship Enterprise. You know, if people haven't been there, I've been there a few times, but you know, these modules, these nodes, and it's all electronic and IT stuff. And so it's exciting, and we want to work with the chamber, and I want to work. And that's my background too, is to get more people involved in that. But there's lots of opportunity, and I think we were seized with it. We have such an asset with Algoma and Sault College to really, you know, keep our young people here, but attract young people and people of all ages, for that matter.
So just, I guess as we begin to wrap up here, again, we do have an election coming up, federal election coming up, and can you maybe give us a little bit of insight as to what your party is looking to put forward as some of the main issues, or what you're seeing as some of the main issues for Sault Ste. Marie and Canada come about 18 months?
Yes. 18 months. I haven't been thinking about that. I was so busy with the tariffs and getting a free trade deal. I think that's going to be critical, though, over the next little while. That's what we're focused on, is defending the steel and aluminum industry, and all industries for that matter. We need a free trade deal. We need free trade deals. We have free trade deals with Europe. We have one signed to be ratified with Asia. When you have the president of the United Steelworkers, 2251, Mike Pratt, going on record saying we need to diversify our trade portfolio and look at Asia and Europe. That's a loud message. It's not what we're saying, but when organized labor is starting to say, you know what, we need to do that. And that is critical too as well. There are so many opportunities, and that's one of the things I'd like to see our business, our community, our chamber, get back into looking at opportunities for trade and new markets in Asia and Europe. Not only in traditional manufacturing, but IT related. We've become a leader in IT. We've seen growth in IT. Some of the funding that we've given to some of these IT businesses, I've seen them grow from 2 to 12 people to 20 people. And we can do that kind of business. We just have to, you know, take that opportunity. And I'm willing to lead on that, you know, to have inbound and outbound, you know, trade missions. Let's take a look at other opportunities. We need to definitely solve our #1 trading partner and get back to that. But we need to take a look at that. So I think that's part of what, you know, the push will be. We're going to continue to support the middle class with tax relief. The Canada Child Benefit, as you heard me describe earlier in the announcement, is a game changer. We're going to invest in infrastructure. And what we've done in the 2018 budget, like the labor market agreement, put $2.7 billion back to the provinces to do training and retraining. A lot of what we did in the 2018 budget is so needed now, because we're able to take those tools now in this trade war and apply them to support industry and to support the workers, including the SIF that I talked about as well. So over the next little while, you know, I'm going to stay focused on the moment. I'll worry about 18 months later, but yeah, we're doing this because it's the right thing, it's the proper thing, and it's the best thing for Canada.
Terry, thank you much. And any questions from the floor before we wrap things up with some closing comments? Frank?
Government to the sudden reappearance of former Prime Minister Harper on the international stage. It looks like he's doing things pretty much on his own, and there hasn't been much consultation with the federal government.
It's a good observation, Frank, and I don't think there's been much consultation with Andrew Scheer, because sometimes they get a little upset when he feels he's being upstaged. But switching gears, I'll talk about Brian Mulroney. You know, part of our strategy when we were renegotiating the free trade agreement is we went to Brian Mulroney and said, you know, give us a hand. Let's work together. And people are like, really? You reached across the aisle like that? I said, of course we did. I said, you know, when you build a house, you know, when you do a renovation on your house, it never hurts to go and talk to the builder. You know, they can tell you some of the nuances of it. Ambrosa, the former leader, she's also been engaged with us to talked to her colleagues as well. And she was on TV the other day just talking again how unfair these tariffs are, and the government is doing is the right direction. So, yeah.
Thank you. One last one? Yes, Osmo.
Yeah.
Sorry, and then Osmo.
The government of Canada, does it have any other plans to deal with possible other tariffs that they might impose against us in the auto sector? Is there anything that the government of Canada might be thinking of in retaliation to that?
What we're going to have to do is get through this first round, because we've given the deadline of July 1st for these tariffs, and there are a great number of them. It's dollar for dollar, but not only on steel and aluminum, but like 128 items. And the reason why we did that was because we wanted to make sure that we didn't unnecessarily hurt Canadian workers. It also served to get their attention, and you know, it's sort of a process thing where the Americans have been put on notice. They're reacting. We expect another reaction after July 1st to it. And the ultimate goal is to just get to the table and let's negotiate fairly a free trade agreement that's a win-win-win.
To go back to the Truth and Reconciliation comments that you made, and first of all, I want a big thank you to the government for their investment on the Shingwak Education Trust site. I think that investment is helping us, so Shingwak Kinamagagamig, Algoma University, Shingwak Education Trust, and the Children of Shingwak Alumni Association. It has established the framework we needed to put ourselves in a position of national leadership. So this summer we have a national event to showcase, I guess, the work that we've done with the exhibition that will really help us to teach the truth around what happened during that residential schools period. It will establish all of the partners to be able to do some pretty incredible work at a national level. And I think it's going to create a huge opportunity for this community to kind of emerge as leaders in truth and reconciliation, only in partnership. How can, I mean, you've put the initial investment in, and now it's time for us to kind of rise to the stage of a national leader. Alberta's done it, British Columbia's done it. No one on this side of the country has done that yet. There are many communities thinking about taking a leadership role in this area. Many universities are trying to establish themselves as a leader on this side of the country. We are the only community that really has the partnership potential, the actual history. We have the former residential school on the site. We have the residential school survivors that want to help us lead this work. We were right there when the commission occurred, when Truth and Reconciliation came out, the apology was made to one of our survivors. So how can we now establish Bawating as the one of the leaders in Canada to do this work, and to help people come to our community, learn about the truth, and also to think very deeply about what that means in terms of reconciliation?
Well, that's an excellent question. First, we get a really good president of Algoma University, so congratulations on taking over recently, and your predecessors did a wonderful job too as well. And you know, 2.5 years ago when I was elected, you know, that what you're saying was very important to me. Just being born and bred here and recognizing the need to work very closely with the Indigenous people around here. Having attended powwows, having been to Truth and Reconciliation meetings at Algoma and being touched by them, and understanding the need to be able to tell our story and be able to listen as part of the healing. When I sat with the people from the Shingwak Trust right when I was elected, and they gave me the proposal that they had, and they've had it for like a decade. And you know, I listened to their story, and it was challenging because traditionally there wasn't any mechanisms to fund them or to support them. So when Minister Baines and Minister Duncan had stood up and talked about the strategic infrastructure fund, which was aimed at universities and colleges or post-secondary institutions, First Nations, Indigenous, because traditionally the federal government really isn't in that world. They leave it to the province and the territories. As I had met with them and I'd heard their ideas, their visions, I was able to call them and say, you got to get it in now, because it's a $2.1 billion national fund, but it's competitive. You know how many universities and colleges there are and other ones. So I was proud that we were able to get them originally $5.1 million and you $2.5 million for the Chinook Hall. I can tell you that I went to bat. There was a lot of convincing, a lot of lobbying on my part, and I'm proud to say that the staff finally listened to me. Because the first, it wasn't a go. It was not a go. The staff. And then I was able to talk to the minister, and the minister really got it and understood it. And when he came here, we announced all the funding for Sault College, Nishnawek Discovery Centre, and Algoma. It was a few months later, I got a phone call from the minister's office. He says he wants to talk to you. And he said there's just a little bit more money, because you know the whole project was there. And would I support an additional 5.1 to the 10.2 million? I said absolutely. And so we had a great dialogue, and so I was very, very pleased that part of that was my lobbying, but part of it was the survivors, the children and the grandchildren, the presentation, you know, that was here. So we've carved that out. We've supported also the museum at Algoma University, which is separate. So that, and when the bricks and mortar come up, we got to figure out as a community, as partners, how we promote it, how we maintain it, how we continue to resource some great ideas. And a lot of it will probably be provincial through educational funding, but how can the federal government continue to support that, and we'll see. But there's different creative ways to do things. Like yesterday I was pleased to be at the Bushplane Museum to announce some money to expand what they were doing, and the city's a partner with that as well. But we're always willing to look at expanding, to take a look at what the benefits are. So congratulations. I look forward to continuing this journey, you know, with our Indigenous communities, because there is a lot of work still to be done.
Well, that brings us to close. Terry, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank Wardlaw Heating and Cooling for the fireplace. The temperature was just right. And of course, the Quattro Hotel and Conference Centre, thank you very much for the service. They're always great folks and services very well.